All right. So let's go ahead and start then. So could you please tell us your name, pronouns, and indigenous nation?
My name is Jessie Parfait, pronouns she, her, and I'm a member of the United Homo Nation.
Where are you from and where do you reside now?
I'm originally from Homa on the east side. Well, before that, I guess I should say Dulac. Originally, my family's from Dulac. I lived there for a few years, but moved to Homa, and now I live in the Itty Homa, or the Baton Rouge.
Could you please tell us your life story in about 3 minutes or just a short version of that?
I will do my best and cut me off at 3 minutes.
No, we will not cut you off, but just
Please
like,
do.
but this is just a recommendation. So like, short version of your life story, in other words.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm originally from Dulac. My family lived there until I was about 5, at which point I experienced my first hurricane, was Hurricane Andrew, and that's about the time my family moved to Homa.
That was in
My,
1992, right?
mhm,
As I recall. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
so I was like 4 or 5 at the time. Oh, I age myself. And then my family moved to Homa, and like I said though, the east side of Homa, so I wasn't far from the Bayou communities. Um, so went to school in Homa, and then I went to school at Nichols, thought I wanted to be a teacher, decided that I did not like kids that much. I mean, love my nephew, but I didn't want to do that all day, every day. So left school, just kind of worked for a while before going back to get my undergrad in anthropology, which I thought was going to be a temporary thing, but turned out to kind of be my a thing that I love doing now. So after that, I worked for the tribe for a few years before getting the opportunity to go back to graduate school and get my master's, which I was super excited about, and so I did. And I wrote my thesis on my tribe because I had already studied a lot of history of the tribe in my undergrad, and I really wanted to focus on that because there is not a whole lot of literature about Indigenous people by Indigenous people. And so I kind of wanted to change that. And so I finished that a few years ago, and since then have been working for the Water Institute of the Gulf as the anthropologist.
All right. And could you tell us what the Water Institute of the Gulf is?
So the Water Institute of the Gulf is a nonprofit based here in Baton Rouge. I work in human dimensions. And so what we really try to do and try to advocate for is having local stakeholders. Of course, I'm especially passionate about Indigenous people providing input on what's going on in our coast right now because we are losing an insane amount of land and have been for decades now. And I don't think these top down approaches with just modeling and just maps are the best way. There are people who know this land and have lived on this land for generations that should have a lot more say than what they currently do in what happens to that land because they're going to be the ones most affected by it.
Your priorities, it seems, at work are strongly influenced by what is important to you. So could you maybe flesh that out? What is important to you?
Yeah, for sure. I think first and foremost is family for me. It always has been. I came from a very, very close family. And as an extension of that, some of my cousins are still fishermen. And what's important to me is, in addition to family, the land that I grew up on and the land that my ancestors have inhabited for literally thousands of years is of the utmost importance to me. Um, I kind of phrase that as if I think they're different, as if the people and the land are different. But that's not at all what I think. I think they're very much the same. Like, the land is also part of my family.
What is your own sense of Indigenous personal identity?
I'm not sure how to answer that. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, sort of when you think of yourself as an Indigenous person, what sort of things do you think about?
I think about the land and understanding it in a way that doesn't just look at what it's worth monetarily. Like, I think of what it's provided for my people for generations and what it continues to provide for me.
Did you struggle with your indigenous identity at all when you were growing up in Dulac and Homa?
I don't think I really struggled with my identity so much as I struggled with understanding what it meant. I, even from a young age, always wanted to be a lot more involved, but like I previously said, there's not a whole lot of literature written on the tribe, and so um, trying to go that route kind of like just hit a dead end. You know, like I loved to read as a kid, and so I was always at the library, but that kind of hit a dead end. There wasn't really a whole lot of literature on the tribe, and so I would talk to my grandparents and my parents as well, and we all knew what we were, but I guess I didn't really see how unique it was. Like, I didn't really, my grandmother just made Indian tacos. We just used filet and everything. I never really thought about those things as aspects of our culture. And so,
Do you think that was because you were surrounded by other Homa people, or?
oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the east side of home is tons of indigenous people. It wasn't really until I started dating a white boy from the other side of town that I realized like how, I don't even know how I want to phrase this. I didn't realize people looked at me differently until then. Like, I saw other indigenous people. I was always surrounded by other indigenous people, so it wasn't like a thing. It wasn't like a thing that I wasn't discriminated against really. And then when I kind of like branched out a little bit, um, I realized that it was different.
Was that through interactions with uh, your boyfriend's family, or just other people that you would encounter with him?
Yeah, she didn't want to meet me at first. She was like something to the effect of, I know what them parfaits from Dulac are like.
And what did she think you were like?
That's a good question. I was like, oh my God, what do you think I'm doing? I'm not gonna say I was like the most well-behaved teenager ever, because like who the hell is? But I did not get into trouble. I did well in school. It was a stereotype that I think persists to this day.
A negative stereotype about the Indigenous community of Homa, or
Yeah, the indigenous people, especially from Dulac.
what is
My old hmm?
people? Can you explain like sort of what the culture of Dulac is like? It's outside
Yeah,
of Homa, right? I think I've only been there once, so.
yeah. I mean, it's really just the bayou community. There's a lot of fishermen, and unfortunately, because people are elitist, that gets looked down upon. And it's not that I think there's any statistics to back up that people from Dulac get in any more trouble than like anybody else, but it's racism, honestly, is what it is. My old office mate was also from Dulac, and his last name was Billiot. which carries a lot of the same negative connotations. And
That's a common Homa surname, isn't it?
yeah, Parfait, Biliat, all of those. And he talked about the ways in which his friends would be profiled by the police.
Do you, is part of, I guess it's interesting. I'm just thinking about hearing you say that, because the seafood industry seems to be such an important part of the public identity of Louisiana. When people come here and then they want to eat that food. I live in the French Quarter, so I interact with tourists much more than the average person does, whether I want to or not. But one of the things they're always talking about is seafood. It seems interesting that, being from a family that, you know, fishes for a living, would be looked down upon, given the importance of that particular product in Louisiana's economy or image or whatnot.
It always struck me as particularly ironic because those same people that look down upon my communities all have hunting camps and fishing camps there, or all at least go there to go fishing.
Do you think that, so they will do it recreationally?
Yeah, recreationally.
That's interesting. Do you fish yourself, or is that something you have engaged in? Or?
When I was younger, but not really so much anymore. Not since my grandfather passed away.
Being from Baton Rouge, I wouldn't fish for anything in Baton Rouge. so
I saw somebody playing with their kid in the river the other day. I was like, dear God, who's calling child services?
For a film I made last year, I actually waded knee deep into the river for a bit, and my boots never stopped smelling after that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother soapbox I can get on how toxic that water is.
I get it. What Indigenous cultural practices do you engage in regularly?
So I attend our tribe's powwows regularly. I dance Southern traditional cloth, and I bead as often as I can, and I weave baskets.
Are these traditional Homa baskets?
Yes, I weave baskets, but I actually don't have any of my own, but I have this one from my great aunt, Marie Dean, whose work is in the Smithsonian and museums all over the place. I found a couple of her baskets and dolls, I think, as well, in the Denver Art Museum. This is hers. Only my mom has ones that I've done, but I've done this style before.
So, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought here for a moment. Did she teach you to do the baskets?
Unfortunately not. She passed away when I was a bit younger, but I learned from her daughter.
What are those made of? It's kind of hard for me to see through the video screen. So.
Oh, so these are made from palmetto.
Okay. Oh, I see now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And are you involved? How much do you harvest the palmetto? Do you do it yourself, or what's your process when you're doing that?
Yeah, I've harvested palmetto myself. You want the fans that haven't opened yet, so the ones in the middle, we call it the heart, before they like fan out and be all huge. So that's the ones you want when you're doing basketry.
And what's the process you use after collecting them?
So you dry it for a while before you actually use it, preferably outside. My grandmother would always tell me, like, that's what my great aunt, we always called her Tamari. So I can stop saying
using the French.
Yeah. So we called her Tamari, and my grandma said every time she went to Tamari's house, she always had like a clothesline hanging with a ton of palmetto, just like drying out in the sun.
what sort of things do you bead?
All kinds of things. I've actually been working on this piece for a while. I just finished a magnolia. I
And so I'm just going to narrate in case people just are listening to it, but this is a beaded oh, that's a really nice piece.
Thank you.
Beaded magnolia. Okay.
I like to, I'm so inspired by this beautiful place that I live. And so I try to pull colors and like creatures and things like this from the places that I live. So like I've done herons and crawfish, and I'm working on an alligator. I know traditionally a lot of indigenous people do like, designs, especially like circles and things like that. But I kind of just wanted to make it my own and make it as beautiful as the place that I live, is what I'm trying to do.
So what is your relationship in terms of the dancing and beading and basketry you do to other indigenous traditions outside of the Homa or related tribes?
I'm sorry.
So you do dancing and beading and basketry. Um, we talked a bit about the basketry, but are the beading and the dancing, are those, I guess leads to the question of what is your relationship in terms of indigenous cultural practice that you borrow from other tribes, maybe outside of, the Homa or other, related Muscovian tribes?
So I hear people use the word tradition all the time, so I'll just say that. I know the basketry and the weaving is more tradish, but I've tried to put like a unique spin on the beads. I don't really know of any historic beading within the tribe, but I was taught to bead by like elders within the tribe who practice beading, and I think I've just found what other indigenous people find in it, and it's medicine. It's really relaxing. It's very calming, and just like seeing something in my head and like bringing it to fruition. I really enjoy, even if it's not tradish.
Yeah. I guess a question we asked Tanner Menard, who's the tribal president of mine, but if when you work in, I guess, Tanner and I guess many other indigenous artists work in traditional forms that might not be the forms of their tribe. But do you feel that it then becomes Homa, or do you feel like you're borrowing from other people, or are you making it really a Homa tradition?
I think I'm making it a Homa thing because I mean, don't get me wrong, I do some other styles of beadwork, but what I really try to focus on is kind of what I talked about and like making it Homa. So like making it swamp, making it crawfish, making things that make it Homa.
What indigenous cultural practices would you like to engage in that you aren't right now?
Hmm. Like from another tribe?
Not necessarily from another tribe, just things that are traditionally indigenous, part of indigenous practice that you yourself might not engage in now. Is there anything in particular you would like to learn more about, or are trying to learn more about?
Yeah, fishing. Fishing the way we used to do it. Fishing the traditional way, not with a pole. I've been fishing like with a fishing pole, but I've definitely read about how our tribe used to fish differently, like put out nets across the waterway and just like catch and things like that and smoke the fish. So I think that's something I would love to do.
Is that and that would be fishing generally in saltwater, or saltwater
Mm,
marshes, or freshwater?
yeah, I would think it would be a little bit more freshwater or at least brackish. I don't think it'd be salt. It's like too far out.
Yeah. Um, this may be like kind of a nebulous question, but you have studied anthropology and worked in related fields. And anthropology is traditionally a discipline, or at least in its founding in relation to Native people, it had a strongly white supremacist bent. And I wish I could say anthropologists I've read recently have gotten away from that. But it's really remarkable, like how deeply ingrained some attitudes are towards it. There are, you know, well-known Native writers like Vine Deloria Jr., who wrote very negatively about anthropologists. There are, of course, Native anthropologists also, like yourself. What is sort of your relationship with the discipline of anthropology as a Native person?
I recognize its pitfalls and I make no apologies for them whatsoever. Anthropology has been used horrendously in the past to justify racial superiority, and just the way anthropology has been used is atrocious. But I don't think it's a burn it all down sort of thing. There are a lot of things like practices that we just need to abandon and burn, but I don't think anthropology is one of them, because I argue I argue with my partner all the time. He's an engineer, and he always tells me, like, it's, or used to anyway. I finally convinced him. He was like, it's not science. It's not science. Like, you write it gets in academic journals, but it's not science. And I always argue, just because it's not hard science, just because there's not a mathematical formula for it, doesn't mean it's not important. Anthropologists have documented histories and cultures that would have otherwise been lost. And I mean, again, not making excuses for the ones who did it in a bad way, but at least in my work, I've tried to reflect the tribe from their own and my own perspective. And I think that's probably a bit what anthropology needs to see more of, is Native anthropologists, because just because you're a part of a culture doesn't mean you can't write about it.
How does in what way are your views maybe different from so one set of writing about the Homo I'm pretty familiar with is the work done, say, by John Swanton,
Mhm.
who also worked on a number of tribes in Louisiana, and including my own. And I don't know nearly as much about the Homo as you do. I know, having read the works of Gotchit and Swanton in relation to my own tribe, a tribe about which I've read probably every published thing, I find their work extremely lacking. That's, I guess, how I can say it. But what is sort of your relationship with this work that is very prominent in terms of study of people from Louisiana, Indigenous peoples?
I am personally a fan of Frank Speck more than Swanton. Not that I dislike Swanton. I mean, there's, of course, the problem of language, the types of language that's been used to describe the tribe. I think actually one of the articles I'm thinking of specifically, Speck published in a journal called The Primitive Man. I know. But the article was great. And he was actually a huge advocate for helping tribal, like Homa specifically, people get education, because there were no schools at the time. There was a black school and a white school, and we were in between, so we couldn't really go anywhere. And so Frank Speck actually wrote to the government on behalf of the tribe. So he was kind of like in our corner on that. I think that answered the question.
Well, do you think what is maybe like a general view of the tribe that you think scholars have, say, proposed or discussed, that you think is probably needs some serious correction, or if there is anything like that?
Oh, there's tons like that. I mean, just look at our federal recognition process. Yeah, I think everybody took the word of John Sibley, who was appointed Indian agent by Thomas Jefferson, of all people. And he wrote that our tribe scarcely existed as a nation, when he had vested interest in saying so, but everybody kind of just took that as gospel. And I feel like it's been an uphill battle ever since, proving that we're still here. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people who have written about the tribe have fallen in line with that narrative. So yeah, it's been really weird proving that people are still here when they never left, but probably just didn't want to be found because of how you were treating Indigenous folks.
It is a difficult thing to try to prove to people that you exist. And I
Yeah.
know I have a collection of about 7 or 8 different published statements as recently as 2007 that the Atakapa Ishak do not exist. They're obviously written by people without internet access, but it was just like, yeah, I don't know how you go about doing something like that. But that does lead me to a question I was kind of wondering, which is, you are an anthropologist, you have an expertise in many of the sort of ways that people have discussed Indigenous people. Do you think that is is that something you, I guess, like, what's your attitude towards use, or sort of what's your practice or desires uh, of using that in relation to service to the tribe? You've worked for the tribe before. Was that related to this sort of work?
No, actually, I was the tribal archivist. So I built from scratch the tribe's archive that it currently has and is currently using. I've digitized like thousands of documents. That was not my background, that was not my expertise, but the tribe was in need of somebody to do that. And so I was like, I accept this challenge. And I just met with other archivists from other libraries, and I met with librarians, and I watched YouTube videos, and I just did my best. But I am actually really proud of what I did in that work because, like I said, I've digitized thousands of documents. All the tribal council minutes are now text searchable. A lot of our paperwork and things from our federal recognition process I digitized. I digitized dozens of newspaper articles, all sorts of things, because when I first started working for the tribe, they took me down to Golden Meadow, which I don't know if you guys have ever been, but you go down to Golden
I
Meadow.
have been to Golden Meadow. Yeah.
Yeah, from the tribal office in Golden Meadow, you can literally see the floodgates. And so I was like, okay, those floodgates are literally all that stands between us and our like decades of the history that we've been keeping for ourselves, like our own documents. That floodgate is all that stands between that and like catastrophe. So I really made it a priority to digitize as much as I can and mostly get like a lot of that stuff out of Golden Meadow because nobody had done that yet. So it was a lot of work and I am very proud of it.
I think that does kind of, I mean, I would imagine that relates a lot to your anthropological work, or maybe, I don't know, did you make discoveries there that ended up helping you with your thesis later?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it motivated me a lot because before I really started doing that work, like the one authoritative, I guess I should say, document on the tribe was what we called the Gray Book. And it was a book written by two Mennonites in the late 80s, early 90s, I want to say. We call it the Gray Book. I think it's the Homa people, a story of Indian survival. Um, but they worked on it in collaboration with the tribe. But still, like before I started working for the tribe, that was like the one thing. I mean, I've read a couple of other little sources here and there, but not like our tribal history the way I learned it as the archivist.
You mentioned the floodgates being so close to the tribal office in Golden Meadow, and we've seen, of course, recently more and more times in which those floodgates become relevant as we seem to encounter more and more hurricanes and severe storms here. Does climate change give you a sense of urgency in the work that you do?
Absolutely, because this is getting worse. Everything is just getting worse. And my tribe's communities are on the front lines of this change. A long time ago, I stand on the soapbox all the time, but a long time ago, the speed bumps for storms coming in from the Gulf were the barrier islands. And there was so much marsh in between the barrier islands and what is now actually the bottom of the state. And now that all of that's gone, our communities are these speed bumps for storms. And so, since these storms are only getting worse and sea level rise is only getting worse, it is more important than ever.
Let me look at my notes here for a moment. Who do you see as your community, Jesse? Is it primarily the tribe, from the people from Dulac? It's just sort of general. Who do you see as your community?
Yeah, I think it's primarily the tribe, my family, and my chosen family. So, my friends, a lot of whom are tribal members, but just the tribe in general.
And how do you usually connect with them?
Facebook, unfortunately, for the past year, I guess. Whenever I'm on that, I don't think I've posted in like months. But no, I make trips out to Homa. I visit Homa often, and I guess it was easier when I worked for the tribe and I saw everybody every day, and I miss that. I do miss that a lot.
How has being a member of a tribe that is not federally recognized influenced these interactions? Or like, as many federally recognized tribes have, say, community centers, and some of our non-federally recognized tribes do, and some don't. But how
Yeah.
has that influenced it?
I think it definitely makes it more difficult to interact and see people because we don't have these communal spaces. So like we have the powwows, we have a couple of events, but what it's like maybe 3-4 times a year tops. And so we don't have like a gathering space per se. I know I can always go to my cousin's dock and people will be there and I can hang out there, and I can go to my grandma's and people always stop and visit her. But as far as like an open to everyone space, we don't have that. And I think that really hinders a lot of interaction because I think people would definitely use something like that.
There are other indigenous nations in the area near Tahoma or surrounding that area. And of course, other indigenous nations, as you get further out from coastal areas. What is your relationship to the other nations of the area?
I have a couple friends here and there. You're one of them. I have a couple of friends in other tribes, but unfortunately, I'm not super involved with any of their going ons either. I'll go to their powwow sometimes, but other than that, not really as much as I would like to be.
What do you describe as the central elements of homoculture?
Hmm. I guess I would have to say resourcefulness that is not in a way that is not detrimentally extractive. Because part of the reason my tribe was able to hide so well for so long is that the land we were living on wasn't valuable. Nobody wanted to live in the swamps. Nobody wanted to live there. I mean, of course, until it was with the discovery of oil and gas in the area. But we took that land that nobody wanted and made it, we didn't just survive there, we thrived. And I think that's a central part of who we are.
What do you think is necessary to continue those aspects of homoculture?
Well, first and foremost, it needs to be there. We're losing so much land literally every day. It actually needs to physically still be there for us to practice a lot of our cultural practices. But I think another very important thing is that people need to see the value in it. I think we're always moving forward. It's always something new. It's always technology. It's always this and that. And it's always promising to be better, to make things easier. And as science is now finally catching up to the way Indigenous people have done things for thousands of years works. It doesn't just work, it works better sometimes. We're not going to out-engineer climate change. I just don't honestly think we are. We're not going to out-engineer the coastal crisis. Like, engineering is what got us into the coastal crisis. And I think people really need to see the value in Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous land practices. Because if we don't, then it's just going to be like another thing that just goes away because people don't see how valuable it is.
You see many of the efforts people are taking now sort of maybe band-aids for what is happening, or as opposed to maybe deeper change.
Yeah, on the coast? Yeah, for sure. I mean, what was the 1927 was the Great Flood on the Mississippi River. After that happened, and don't get me wrong, I don't even pretend to know what the right answer was, but that's when we pretty much levied off the entire Mississippi River. And even then, they said this is not a permanent solution. They knew that this wasn't a forever fix, that this was a Band-Aid. They just thought in the future people would figure it out, but we have not.
And yeah, we live in the future now.
Yeah, we live in the future now. We're still fixing the damn levee. And I mean, again, don't know what the right answer is, but they knew at the time it wasn't a levee that completely restricts the Mississippi River from depositing sediment. It's like, maybe you just don't build in floodplains. But that's a whole nother argument.
It is interesting. I don't know if you have found this, that people do sometimes, like, what's interesting to me is sometimes when people stumble upon an Indigenous solution who are not Indigenous, like in Texas, someplace along the coast, they're taking oyster shells from restaurants and using them to shore up the coastline. And this is like such a big deal, and it just like, and I saw this article and I just started laughing. I was like, oh, wow, y'all finally discovered that? Well, you should get a little bit behind, but like,
like the wildfires in California, like Indigenous people used to do the small controlled burns to get rid of the underbrush so that wildfires like couldn't spread as bad as they do. And now they're actually they stopped people from doing that because they're like, this is the best way, trying to out engineer it again. This is the best way, no fires. Like, okay, now you have these crazy massive wildfires in California, and they're actually thinking about going back to doing controlled burns and letting Indigenous people do controlled burns. And it's like, wow, you mean to tell me that the people who lived here for thousands of years knew what the fuck they were doing? You don't say.
Do you find is that something that you bring to your professional practice, a knowledge of sort of Indigenous aspects of Indigenous ways, particular Indigenous ways?
Yes, and it is very much an uphill battle, but it's definitely one that I'm behind my boss on, or, we work together on. And it's been an uphill battle in getting state agencies to, recognize the value in this information and take it seriously. Just because someone doesn't have letters behind their name doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about.
Do you think there's some sort of prejudice behind not taking it seriously, or?
I think it's more this academic elitism that we have, like people who went to school know something. It's just like, sure, I mean, I know some stuff, but I've studied the coast for years and years and years, and I don't know half as much as my cousin who's a shrimper.
Yeah.
Because he lives it. He experiences it every day.
You mentioned a little bit of French, and it's really common for, I guess, for Indigenous people to speak French in Louisiana. I mean, my relatives spoke it, and I've certainly spoken French at the Homa powwow with people. What is your relationship to languages other than English? Have you been involved in Indigenous languages, or did you speak French at home growing up?
No, unfortunately not. And I think I think that's kind of a byproduct of the schools that my grandmother would go to, because if she spoke French, she said they would like hit her. And so my mom speaks French, but I think that's just because it was my grandmother's first language, but they never taught me or my brother. So I think my mom's generation is going to be one of the last generations that speaks that type of French.
Was it part of the sort of cultural identity, maybe the way that Spanish can be part of cultural identity with Indigenous peoples of Latin America who come here sometimes?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely like something we adopted. I know it wasn't originally ours, but it's definitely something we've adopted and kind of made our own. And I know there's a linguist on the call who can uh, correct my details on this, but I do know that some of our Indigenous words are sprinkled throughout the French that we speak. So particularly with the word raccoon,
And what is your word for raccoon?
the tribal word for raccoon is shawi. The French word is actually raton leveux, which means little rat who washes, which is just the cutest.
That is very cute. I've
I
never
mean, not as
used
cute as
that though.
shawi.
I guess I grew up speaking French with my grandfather, and so he always used shawi as well. So,
Yeah, so there's a little bit of our language sprinkled in there.
um, are you often asked to talk about your Indigenous background? I've seen you give a public talk before here in Bobancha, but is that something you're often asked to do, or just even in, smaller non-public contexts?
Um, I wouldn't say super often, but yeah, sometimes. And it's a double-edged thing. Like I love doing it for like Indigenous publications and Indigenous media and things like that. I love that, but I will not engage a drunk person because that's like a whole thing. It's it's one of those weird rules that you have to make because somebody made it a problem.
Yeah.
But I think people are genuinely really curious, um, they're genuinely curious, and people, I don't mind if it's like friends or things like that, but people, you know, sometimes I won't bring it up because then it just opens the floodgates of like weird questions. I mean, kind of like saying you're from Louisiana. I kind of got the same thing the first time I met people from California. They're like, do you ride a lawnmower to school? Do you eat squirrels? I'm like, I don't. People who do, and that's not helping the case.
What are some of the questions people ask you that are kind of bizarre questions?
Number one, I think, is always Indian. Oh, do you prefer Native American? That's, you know, people act like they have to walk on eggshells around the question.
Do you prefer Native American? Because this is always a question I ask people. Like,
so I've come up with clear rules on this for myself.
okay, yeah, I'm very interested in this because I also have clear rules for myself, and so like I'm kind of interested to see what yours are.
I accept Indian only from other Indigenous people. No one else is allowed to call me that.
All right.
But I actually prefer Indigenous because I think it's. Am I allowed to curse?
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
The fact of the matter is that it's fucked up that we only force two racial groups of people to hyphenate. We say African American and we say Native American when we should be saying European American. Like the two groups of people you are forcing to hyphenate as Americans are the people who are originally here and the people that were forcibly brought here. So no, I don't want that title.
You prefer Indigenous then for general
I
usage?
prefer Indigenous because I think it also, I think of Indigenous communities all over the world as Indigenous, and I really want to identify more in that way to, what's the word I'm looking for really, but to bring our struggles together, to recognize that we're all Indigenous.
And what do you see as common elements of those struggles?
Hmm?
What do you see as common elements of those Indigenous struggles?
Actually, same thing that we're living with here, people not recognizing our knowledge as legitimate, people using our land in extractive and detrimental ways. I mean, look at the Amazon, look at what Hawaii has become. Just a blatant disregard for cultural practices in the name of progress.
Thinking about who the audience for this might be, is there anything we haven't talked about that you think we should talk about?
Outside of Indigenous communities, I know what I said, but like, I don't want to deter people from asking questions. I really don't. But I think it's also important that people understand it's not our jobs to educate you. Sometimes things are hard to talk about. And I think people should respect that boundary. But I mean, that's not just for Indigenous people, that's for anything, you know? Just respect people's boundaries and gauge whether or not conversations are appropriate for the space or the amount of alcohol you had.
I'm sure there's a story behind that, but I'm not going to ask you what it is.
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. It was just, I was at a friend's house. I'm not going to mention any names or any identifying details. I was at a friend's house, and friend of a friend was also there, and we were all, you know, just having a good time. And friend was like, oh, you're a Native American. I have such a deep respect for your people. I'm like, oh,
Isn't that always one of the worst things?
This is weird. How do you respond to that? I mean, I guess it's always better than, oh, you're Indigenous, my great. I don't like that, because that's no way to respond to people. I had an encounter the other day. Y'all, I'm not even kidding. I could not make this up. I was walking my dog, and this guy, we have these neighbors who sit out in their driveway every afternoon, and they just, like, you know, have a glass of wine, sit out in their driveway, and they're really sweet. Well, they had a drunk friend over, and I had a single braid in my hair, and that was like literally it. My eyes are green, like, I know I'm pale. This guy just goes, "Are you an Indian?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm Indigenous. And then his wife was trying to, like, walk him back. And he goes, "Oh, you are an Indian. I thought so. You look like an Indian." His wife was Indigenous. She said Indigenous. And then his wife, in an attempt to make it better, goes, "You know, I read a book about the Indigenous people of New Jersey."
That's good.
Okay. If somebody tells me they're from England, I'm not going to be like, "Oh, I love the Spice Girls." Like, that's not how you relate to people. I'm a person. You can have a normal conversation with me. I was like, damn, I thought I had them fooled.
Haley has a question here, so I'm going to, and then I'm almost done with my set of questions, Haley. So, but please ask Haley.
Oh, I think I might be asking the might just about to be asking. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that.
All right, well, I tell you what, I'm almost done, and then maybe we'll circle around and you can ask that question. I guess one question, so people have asked you things about That was interesting though, what you said about the Spice Girls in England, because
I do love the Spice Girls.
I once met a Samoan person at a conference, and she told me, she's like, "Oh, I'm Samoan." It's like The Rock, right? And she's so like, "Well, we're more than just The Rock." And I was like, "Man, The Rock was one of my people. I'd be telling everybody I know, like, like, what are you attacking about?" She's like, "Yeah, like The Rock." Like I would, I don't know. What do you wish? What do you wish people would ask you about your Indigenous experience, as opposed to like the bad experiences you had? What things do you kind of wish people would ask you about so that you could speak to them?
I guess first and foremost, I will interrupt any conversation to get on a soapbox about Indigenous rights. But I do wish people would ask those types of questions more, like, oh, what's going on in North Dakota? What's going on right now in Canada? Maybe not like what's going on, but like, how do you feel about it? How does that make you feel? I think people kind of just sometimes look at me as like a walking like book, especially doing archival work. It's like, oh, tell me this fact, tell me this fact. But just like anyone else, we have feelings and we are affected by what's going on. And so I think I wish people cared more to understand the way those things make us feel and why. So, I mean,
Yeah, it does seem like to me, and I mean, you were, I mean, it seems like Native people have been in the news more in the past, say, 7 or 8 years than in the time previous in my life, anyway. So it seems like, do you think that's, I don't know, it seems like there is an interest in at least having the fact that news stories are being reported. It seems like there's some interest, but it is interesting that, like how, like, how have you been affected sort of when you hear stories that have increasingly been reported about Louisiana, Indigenous people also, in relation to climate change? What is your reaction when you hear those stories, so say in national media?
I like that people are paying attention, but I want to see it become more actionable.
Do you
I
feel
like
that,
that. Hmm?
do you think that action, have you seen some positive developments, or is as a result of more of a light being shown on such things?
I think it's too soon to say. I don't really know because I mean the island is Ile de Jean Charles. Just say the island, but Ile de Jean Charles has been reported on a lot, and that situation. I mean, I guess they made some accommodations for what people were asking for, but it was, for lack of better words, busted from the beginning.
Mm.
Like the project started out busted, and I think because it did get so much national attention, they did make slightly more accommodations for what island residents wanted. But I don't know that it's enough. Not for them or not for all of the communities that are about to become them, just displaced by coastal erosion.
Given these very serious issues, what gives you hope right now?
I think an increasing amount of involvement and access to information. Just I've seen our younger generations become a lot more interested in climate change and what's going on the coast, and just the fact that they're receptive to hearing me talk about those things, and they always are. One of my old coworkers used to put on a summer camp for kids, and I would go and do like a little history piece and talk about, Louisiana. And kids are genuinely interested in those things now because I think they're seeing it. They have access to the information, they have access to the maps, they have access to like historic information, maybe not on the tribe specifically all the time, but at least on the state, and they're interested.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And I know Haley has some questions. I may have some more later too, but I'm going to hand off to Haley right now.
I have questions.
Okay.
I just want to start off with thank you so much for what you've said so far. I remember, while we were organizing these interviews, Ida and I are both Homa, and we're thinking about who we want to interview and like who's going to not represent, but who do we want to hear speak about things. And we're tossing out names, and then Ida goes like, "What about Jessica Parfait?" And everyone, all three of us were like, "Yeah." Yeah, it was just like this unison of ooh.
I feel seen.
Yeah. So we're really glad you're here today and talking to us, and really appreciate you sharing the story. I have questions. I guess I have some questions from some of the stuff that you said, and then I also know that you have items around you displayed, and I'd love to do the show and tell and stuff. So I guess which one would you like to do first? Kind of show and tell or the questions?
I don't know. Let's do show and tell.
Let's do show and tell. Okay, yeah. So you have items. You want to hold up an item and talk about it, and then we can ask questions. Okay.
So this is a moss doll, also
Okay.
made from my great aunt Tante Marie. It's made out of Spanish moss.
Uh-huh.
I'm like one of those videos.
Yeah.
YouTube people.
So for the viewers at home, when I see Spanish moss, it's gray. That is not gray. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is after it's cleaned and dried, so it's no longer alive. Spanish moss is actually an air plant. It's not a moss. Common misconception from the name, because of course. But so it's taken out, it's cleaned, and it's dried. They used to use it for all sorts of things, like stuffing mattresses, and the tribe actually used it to make rope and all kinds of things. But my great aunt continued the tradition of making dolls, so that's what this is.
Wow, it's beautiful.
Thank you. She also weaved baskets. So this is one of her baskets right here.
Mm-hmm.
This is the.
Now that's it. I see a lot of baskets from like the Southeast, and that seems like an unusual shape. I usually see like something that looks kind of like a palm needle or a coil basket, I would call it. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's different and why?
I don't actually know.
Okay.
I just know that two different style. Well, we have like 3 different styles. So we have the 4-strand, the 8-strand, and the half-hitch coil, which I don't have an example of, but I do have an example of the 8-strand. So this is the 8-strand. You can see it doesn't have like the jagged edges. It produces like straight lines on the edge.
Wow.
And this is my grandmother's hat from when she was a child.
Wow.
By my great aunt, Tante Marie. And she said she was so worried because she was actually out on a boat. My grandmother used to work on a platform drying shrimp. And she was out on a boat and she lost her hat, like it blew off and went into the water. And 2 days later, she actually found it still intact.
Wow.
So this hat is probably like 60 years old and spent 2 days in a bayou and still looks this incredible. This is my most prized possession. She only just recently gave it to me, and I love it so much. It's a connection to her and to my great aunt who's no longer with us.
Aww. How do you care for such a beautiful item? I mean, it looks so well taken care of.
As a former archivist, I should have a better answer for that, and it should be in an acid-proof box, but it's not what it's meant for. It was meant to be worn and seen, and so it's on my wall in my office where I spend most of my day.
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
Mr. Ivy is one of our traditional wood carvers, so I love raccoons. They are one of my favorite things.
Aw.
Little trash pandas, shout.
Aw.
They have so many fun names.
Aw.
So my mom got me this from Mr. Ivy, who's one of our wood carvers.
Oh, that's adorable. He's so sweet. Yeah. I love his work. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's great. And I have some beadwork that I've shown y'all.
The magnolia.
Yeah, the magnolia and a couple little other things that I'm working on.
Yeah.
So
let's
like,
Oh, beautiful. Those are earrings.
they're gonna be when I'm done.
Now, how long does it take you to make some of those?
Oh my god, so long, so long. A pair about this size, I don't know, maybe like 10 hours.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, that's why I have so many little things. I get bored with something, I start working on something new. I never have less than like 4 ongoing projects, which probably isn't a good thing, but I try to finish them. I finished a huge piece this week that I'm very proud of that's on its way to California.
Oh, really? What is it?
Okay, this won't be released soon because she didn't get it yet, but it's a gift. It's a gift for my friend Osprey. So it is an osprey, but it's like
wow.
this big.
Wow.
So it's a giant like statement necklace with its wings spread like that.
Wow.
Her name's Osprey. It's an osprey.
That's cute.
She runs the Women Environmental Climate Action Network, so we can. And so she works with Indigenous communities all over the world in advocating for land rights and among many, many other things that she does. She's just incredible. I'm so impressed by her. And I've been working on that bird for like 2 years. I finally like mailed it out to her and I've been texting her every day like, did you get it yet? Did you get it yet? She doesn't know what it is, so I'm so stoked.
Wow, what a gift. What a beautiful thing to give to someone. I guess I have 2 questions. I want to ask about your earrings, but I guess we'll get that later. I guess the next thing I want to, did you make those earrings? I guess we should ask that now.
So these were made by my favorite artist.
Oh, wow.
Elias Not Afraid.
Uh-huh.
And he's been featured in Vogue. And I love how fashion's finally catching up to how beautiful Indigenous fashion is. But he's been featured in Vogue. And when I got the opportunity to get these, I just could not pass it up. His work is phenomenal. It's so beautiful.
Oh.
Just look up his Instagram. It's just incredible. It's what my dreams are made of.
Elias Not Afraid is his Instagram?
Elias Jade Not Afraid.
Elias Jade Not Afraid. Okay,
yeah.
I'll check it out. That brings me to the question of, like, you were talking earlier that you have all of these crafts going at the same time, and I think earlier that you mentioned that like it's a calming or something that you do that's important. Can you speak a little bit about like what is craft to you?
Yeah, I work for a nonprofit, but like we do a lot of academics type work. We do a lot of like theoretical work. I write a lot of reports. I make maps, which don't get me wrong, I enjoy. I love making maps. It's probably one of my favorite parts of my job sometimes. But I feel like that's not really my connection to who I am. And that's okay. Like your job should not or does not have to be your identity or anything like that. And so the crafts that I do, I think, keep me grounded in a way that gives me something to do with my hands. Just our people create things. They've created things for so long. And like I said, my great aunt weaved baskets, and I feel like that connects me to her.
What is it, I heard you say that you sent out this this osprey to your friend and you're waiting for it, and so like what is it, is the fact that other people see your work or the fact that you're able to share it with other people, even if it's as a gift, is that important to the practice of making things for you?
It is the most important thing. I very seldom sell anything. I don't do this for money. And I mean, that's no disrespect to people who do. That's just not what I use it for. I like doing it because a lot of love goes into it. And I think when I send people things, and I've given some of my friends pieces, they know how long it takes me. Literally everyone's seen me do this. Like, you know, I'm surprised I'm not doing it right now. Like I'll be on a call or in a meeting or something sometimes, and I'm just beating. And so people understand how long it takes. And I think that's a really powerful thing to give someone nowadays is your time. Because it's so easy to just like, you know, little half-hearted little messages on Facebook and things like that take like 30 seconds to type. And again, no disrespect to people who do that. And like, that's how you communicate with people. That's fine. But like, especially working full time and doing everything else you have to do in your life to give people literally like 10, 20 hours of your life is really powerful. And the same with basketry and the other things that people have given me. That's why they're so special to me. I mean, in addition to cultural reasons, of course, but like this is literally a part of your life that you're giving me. And even if you buy it, like I said, I purchased these, even if you buy it, it's still the reason I have such a deep respect for it is because you were literally purchasing like time and love. You don't make something this beautiful without love going into it.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, it's powerful. I have like, you mentioned something when you were saying that you bead while you're working, and something that struck me a lot is that every Indigenous person that I know is an activist. You know, I think Jeffrey covered this in another interview where it's like you talk to everyone, they're all busy and they're doing something and they're involved in things. But I'm interested to think about, you know, like your work-life balance, if that's a thing. You know, like if your work is so connected to like the place that you grow up and the things that matter most to you at the core of yourself. You know, it's not like you're someone who's external from the community who takes their hat off and goes home and was like, yeah, I filed a few papers today. Can you talk a little bit about is there a balance, or how do you negotiate that? Do you see that there's a separation, or do you see it as the same thing?
I think it's a very different thing because of the way that we approach it. Like I said, academic literature as a whole, it's borderline not English sometimes. And so I'm able to write like that, but I don't talk like that. That's not at all. I mean, I think low key, I think it can be kind of pretentious sometimes, but none of the people I'm not saying the people I work with are pretentious. They're great. Like just academic literature in general. And so I think I'm not always great at striking that balance, but I think when it gets the hardest is when I know things are going to affect my communities and just kind of like repressing the urge to yell profanities or, you know, to say things that I can't back up academically. You know, I have a lot of knowledge just from people that I've talked to and things that I've seen in my lifetime, but I can't write a published article on that a lot of times. And so I think, I don't know, it's a weird place to be for me sometimes. I definitely have imposter syndrome. I am just like waiting for them to figure out, you know, who doesn't belong here. But yeah, kind of went off on a tangent there.
No, I'm thinking about like what you were saying about, you know, like you can't just write articles about the things that you know, and I'm just sitting in that.
Yeah, even though I know them from like my lived experience and and people that I've talked to. And that's very much what I tried to make my thesis, was a bit more of that. But of course, like, you know, every couple sentences, like, here's a citation, here's a citation, here's some philosopher that agrees with me, here's this, here's the Declaration of Independence.
That's so wild that, you know, you feel like the things that you know aren't the things that you can bring to the table in some sense.
They definitely are within my department. Like, I mean, like I said, we're human dimensions, like that's kind of what we do. But when I'm thinking more like academic spaces, like conferences or like public meetings, things like that, you know, where I can't really necessarily cite everything I want to say.
Mhm. If you had like a sidekick who was an academic and who could just like was an extremely speedy writer, and as you were thinking of things you needed backed up, that person was like on it, went out, wrote something that was citable. What are you finding are the things that you're feeling like, gee, wish someone would be, wish I could cite this?
I think so. This interesting question, but I think one of the things I would pick would be like the history of oppression in Homa specifically, because I think a lot of people look at our tribe and say, well, oh, you didn't go to like settlement schools, so you weren't shipped off to reservations, so it wasn't that bad. You know, I think about things like that, and it's just like, okay, sure, it's not, first of all, it's not the oppression Olympics. And second of, like, don't do that. Don't pit Indigenous people against each other. But second of all is that doesn't mean we didn't face discrimination. And that does not mean the effects of that aren't still felt today. You know, like my grandmother wasn't allowed to go to school. And so consequently, I'm first generation college student in my family. And that doesn't just happen. You know, it's not like the opportunity was there for my mom and dad and they just didn't take it or they didn't work hard enough. There's some of the hardest working people that I know. They just didn't have the opportunities, but they gave them to me.
It's a big gift. Do you ever struggle with that feeling of the big gift?
I do. I do, because I wonder what it would have been like for them if they had more. And it's just not fair that that was taken from them.
Yeah. When we're one thing that you I guess we kind of covered that, but one thing that you mentioned earlier is that I had never thought of this before, but you were thinking about land as part of your family. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that. I think that phrase really struck me.
Yeah. I mean, what does a family do? It's there for you, it provides for you, it offers you protection. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what the land does for us. It even still, after it's been ravaged by unchecked industrial use for decades, it still provides protection from storms for us. It still provides a lot of the food I eat. And it very much is like a part of my family. Miss it when I'm not there. I visit it often. Never seems like enough.
We're talking a little bit about land, and something that you mentioned earlier is a lot of your family is fishermen, what is your relationship to water? Do you see that as the same as land, or do you see it as differently?
Yeah, it's definitely, I see it as the same. It's kind of a weird, I know in Louisiana we have like this total weird relationship with water. Like we love it, but it's terrifying. And so I think I kind of share that same relationship that a lot of, like, pretty much anybody who survived a hurricane, more or less multiple hurricanes, has with water. Like I'll still like freak out if there's water on the side of the road where it's not supposed to be. I'm like, "Oof, tide's high." Like, oh no, I'm in Baton Rouge now. Tide's still high.
Get that. One thing that I took from your life story is that I did know that you were interested in being a teacher. What was it that was drawing you to teaching?
Well, my mom's a teacher's aide, and I definitely, unfortunately, just fell into one of those statistics where first generation college students tend to gravitate more towards degrees that directly correlate to a career. And so, I mean, they don't really usually have the luxury of like gambling on something like anthropology. I'm just fortunate that this worked out for me. But, I would understand why people would not want to do something like that if you don't, you're taking on a lot of responsibility and in a lot of cases, a lot of debt. So you want to directly go into a field that get a degree that correlates to a field. I don't remember the statistic, but I think it's like over 50% of first generation college students do something like that. And I kind of fell into that. Anthropology was not what I thought I would be doing. My first love has always been architecture. Yeah, I thought that's what I was going to do. And I got my undergrad at LSU thinking I would go to graduate school for architecture because, again, first generation college student, did not know that was a thing, did not know you could go. I feel so dumb saying this, but like, this is honesty, okay? I did not know that you could go to graduate school for something that you did not go to for undergrad. So like, I thought you had to like, do the whole thing straight across. And then I met with somebody at LSU who was like, I know you were in school to be a teacher, and because of that, my grades weren't great. He's like, you're not going to get into architecture school. Everyone that's in architecture school has like 4.0s. And I was like, okay, what can I do? I want to be an architect. He's like, oh, well, just get an undergrad in like anything, whatever you want. And then just come here for graduate school. And I was like, dope, I'm going to do that. And so that's what I did. And then as I was in the process of doing that, I remember I worked on, this is a fun story actually. I worked with who became my advisor, Dr. Regis, on a project studying subsistence on the Gulf Coast after the BP oil spill. And I interviewed a fisherman. And I just remember sitting in her office across from two academic professors, like two doctorates. And they're looking at each other looking at the transcript that I had transcribed, going, is it chua or is it like chua? Just trying to get like this little tiny dialectic thing just right. And I was so struck by that moment because I was like, wow, y'all really care about this. Like for a living, but for real. Like this matters to academia. Like this is amazing. And I always think of Zora Neale Hurston, who is, of course, my favorite anthropologist and the first Native anthropologist who studied her own culture. And she talked about the ways that anthropology kind of gave her this spyglass of looking at her own culture because she had been in it and she was raised in it. And so it was really all she ever knew. And then when she went away and learned about anthropology, it gave her a whole different way of looking at it. And I very much feel like that's what happened to me. But in that little chua, chua, chua moment. But it's chua. Like you see something that amazes you, chua.
Oh, yeah.
Chua.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I really appreciate one thing that I see across your interest is this this celebration and attention to beauty and detail in what you do. Do you feel that? Or
I do. I am very, very detailed oriented in everything that I do. I like everything to like the light sconces. But I really appreciate it because I feel like it's given me such an eye in historic research, but also just like in talking to people. I'm very curious by nature. And, you know, when I talk to my cousin who's a shrimper and he'll tell me something, he's like, that diversion project or, you know, whatever, that levee project's not going to work. I'll be like, oh, why? And then like he'll explain it. And I want to understand all the little nuances about the estuary and everything. And I kind of bring it to a lot of different aspects of my life.
who, you know, as we do these interviews, you know, we're trying to make these public and trying to make them as available as possible. Who do you think you would want to hear your story, or who do you think you would want to listen to this?
Hopefully some other little first gen kids wondering if it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think more than anything, I want them to know that it is. And it doesn't have to be college, and it obviously doesn't have to be anthropology, but whatever it is you want, it's worth pursuing, because the luxury of choice is something that was taken away from our ancestors. And we might have a lot more barriers than common folk, but we have a lot more choice than our ancestors ever did.
Smart. I want to open the floor to see if Ida has any questions. They've been listening for a bit now. I see in the chat they say, I'm with you, first gen college student as well, who had to figure out the whole process out myself.
Yeah, it's not easy. From everything about it is complicated. Like from the application process. Oh my God, when I was trying to get out of grad school, I was like, okay, is this all the paperwork you need? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And then they're like, oh, but you didn't provide, they sent me an email later, like you didn't provide this document. I was like, I literally asked. It's like, is this everything you need? It's like, I promised you my firstborn child. Jesus, what more do you want from me? Give me that degree.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I actually had gotten into an excellent school, but because I had no help or understanding of how to figure out scholarships and how to get it paid for, my parents were like, that's great. Like, cool, you got into Smith College. How are you going to pay for it? And I was like, oh, guess I'm going to Cape Cod Community College instead. And so I did the associate degree, took a couple years off, and then ended up going back after the first recession hit to get my bachelor's degree, because I was like, I need to do what I want to do, kind of thing. And yeah, just the entire way, just fighting and trying to understand this very confusing process, which also like they needed to include the parents and parental information, and my parents were not able to give that. It's just a mess. It's just hard.
I mean, it's hard for everyone. You're asking kids who like literally had to ask for permission to go to the bathroom a year ago to suddenly start making life decisions. So like imagine how much harder it is for Indigenous kids whose parents probably didn't go to school, so they have no way of navigating this academic space that barely wants them.
For sure. Agree. Yeah. So I do have a couple questions. What you were just talking about with the cho, is that the like exclamation of like, I know it as like ko or like ko, man.
Yeah. So cho, or like I hear if it's abrupt, sometimes I'll hear it like cho. I'll hear it like that too.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. And then my second question, which is a little bit more in depth, can you tell us about your WeCan work? Because I am also working with WeCan on a food sovereignty project, and they've been just wonderful and inspiring. I agree. Osprey is so cool and has been so helpful and caring, and like, so yeah, I'm interested about your project with We Can and stuff, other similar work that you've done that you want to talk about.
So I was involved with a divestment campaign with We Can, where we flew to New York and flew to New York to get trained in DC, which is weird to me. Like I always think it's so weird to me how close together all those places are. Because, you know, like here you drive literally like 15 hours and you're still in Texas. But anyway, so I was involved with divestment work where we met with bankers trying to get them to divest from oil and gas by talking about our lived experiences here and, you know, everywhere, all over the country. We've had women from all over the country go and kind of give like firsthand stories to the destruction that they're causing in a lot of these communities. And I think it was actually really well received. You know, it's one thing to read about this or hear a statistic and the cancer rates in Louisiana, but it's a whole nother thing to actually like hear someone say that they've lost loved ones. And I mean, we actually had one recently that was digital. And so we had another divestment campaign digitally, like, you know, over Zoom or something. And I kind of just talked about, you know, the cancer rates here in Louisiana and how I kind of always just wonder if my fate's going to be the same. And even if I knew for sure that it was, would I leave? Knowing that I'm abandoning everyone else that can't. And so I hope that resonated with someone when they're thinking about where to put their money in the future. I mean, from the people that we talked to in New York, I think it definitely did. But I love that kind of work, and I love everything Miss Osprey does. She's an incredible force of nature.
And I guess a follow-up question is there any place in your travels as you go to see these different resistances and people fighting their fight, are there any places that really stood out to you? Like, are there strongholds that really inspired you?
I think mine's probably going to be the same. You know, I went to North Dakota during the Dakota Access Pipeline. I mean, I don't, you know, it's not like I didn't stay very long. I went over a holiday, but I bought supplies. Actually, the tribe donated a bunch of supplies. And I tell everyone that I could have literally showed up with nothing. I mean, I didn't because I didn't want to take from people who were spending like extended amounts of time there. I could have literally bought nothing and I would have been fine. Like, it was beautiful just seeing people taking care of people, like just united under this fight. And I'm serious, like nothing. People were always offering me food. People were offering me like, do you need another jacket? Do you need some boots? And yeah, it was mutual aid. It was, you know, other people doing what I was doing, just like bringing supplies, making sure that everybody had what they needed. I was very inspired by that.
That's all I had. Thank you. Yakoki.
Yeah, Cody.
That's all I had too. I really enjoyed listening to this conversation, and thank you for spending your time and your evening with us today. I really appreciate that.
Sure. Thank y'all for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
It was really great hearing you talk about that stuff. I did want to ask you something about this though. Like you were mentioning, like when you were archivists, and you know they just you kind of landed into that. do you feel sometimes like if you're in a community where a lot of people did not go to college, which is true of, I mean, the vast majority, I guess, of especially the non-federally recognized tribes in Louisiana, do you feel there is kind of a responsibility to help carry the traditions in some sort of way of, that is with publishing or anything like that? Do you feel that that is kind of a responsibility that you feel as someone with a, Western style education?
Yes, no. And let me explain what I mean by that. So like when I write academically, I know no one's going to read that. Like I'm not going to subject my parents to that. Like that's not what I read for fun. And so I don't really feel a responsibility to publish academically for anything like other than like, for lack of better words, clout,
Yeah.
like in academia, but not really clout within the community. So what I want to do eventually is I do want to write on the tribe. I do want to publish on the tribe, but not academic literature. More like I don't know if you've ever seen Don Davis's books. He's written a bunch of books on Louisiana, but they're full of pictures and they're gorgeous. They're like full color, full of pictures. I would love to do something like that because I mean, my grandmother didn't go to school. She can't read, but I've gotten her or bought her those books before and she loves looking at them. And so if anything, I feel the responsibility to do something like that.
Sure. Thank you for answering that. I was just thinking about it when Haley was talking. I had thought about it when I was talking to you, and then I kind of forgot to swing around back to it. Hey, thank you. You have any more questions?
Good. Thanks so much. This has been great.
Coolio.